Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Empower LEP podcast. I'm your host, Jana Parker, licensed educational psychologist, group practice owner, and mentor at Empower LEP. Today, I'm hosting Briana Wagner. She's a 7-year school psychologist, and she's a friendly face on social media. Briana's Instagram account is @educationally psyched, where she is supporting educators and parents learning together about school psychology, special education, and diverse learners. She creates student and parent-friendly resources to support student self-advocacy and for better understanding the IEP process. Briana is also an LEP, and she's beginning to brainstorm ways that she plans to dabble in the private sector. This conversation is full of energy, and you can tell just how educationally psyched Briana is. We kind of jump right in because we had just started talking and hadn't even pressed record yet, so bear with us. Briana and I are kind of all over the place in this one, and I feel like I could have continued with her for hours. As always, I hope that you enjoy this conversation as much as I did.
So I got really passionate about dynamic assessment, which was something that I realized after talking on my Instagram that a lot of programs do not teach at all. But my program in San Diego State, we had a whole course on it. And one of my mentor professors had started the program and was really heavily interested in dynamic assessment. And so in my last school that I was at, there were three different special day classes. And I was just getting really frustrated because the traditional IQ testing was it didn't give us any new information. The parents didn't like hearing about it. It was like, oh, great, 1 percentile, less than first percentile again. Like,
Right.
Tell me something that's actually going to mean something to me. And so I had this moment where I was like, I remember my dynamic assessment test, or my dynamic assessment course, which was a year-long course. And we learned about it. And then we actually worked in a school and used this thing called mediated learning to help students with the testing. And then, it was like a collaborative process where we're looking at their thinking skills, seeing how they approach different tests. Like one of the tests in my toolkit is really like matrices, where you're trying to figure out the rule. And when we give those tests, we are, seeing, are these kids picking up on patterns? Are they finding the rules? How are they solving this problem? But because it's standardized, we are not allowed to, maybe we can test the limits, but we're not allowed to intervene at all.
Right.
And there's always that question in my mind, if I had given them this direction, how would they approach this task? Could they have been able to do it? And with, traditional IQ tests, like those questions go unanswered unless you do something extra on your own. And so it just dawned on me that especially with that population of kid, especially with that population of kids, a lot of them being categorized under intellectual disability, I just felt like those IQ tests were just not helpful. And so I thought maybe if I brought in dynamic assessment, I could actually give parents useful information. I could feel like I'm not torturing the kid. And then there's something positive that comes from this whole assessment process, besides just checking a box. Okay, I gave them the IQ test, same thing as before, report the scores, moving on.
Yeah.
So that was one of my big passions last year. I dug up the psychologist that created this dynamic assessment toolkit that I was trained on, that he, was not that he's protective of it, but you need to be trained to use it. And so he only allowed people that had done the training to purchase it. And since my program offered the training, I was eligible to purchase it. Otherwise, you had to be trained in person in Georgia at his institute. So anyway, I was sharing this all with everybody on my Instagram, and people are like, what is that? How do I get trained on that? I have the same problem. Parents are like, that's my problem with my child too. I find IEP meetings, triennial meetings, so pointless because what is this information? So I got everybody all hyped up about it. And then I had to be like, sorry, you can't purchase this. I don't know how you can get trained in it, but I'll work on it.
Yeah.
So when I met up with my professor at NASP in 2023, 2023 in NASP, I was talking to her about we should do something with this.
Yeah.
It was like, let's do a presentation. I think she's done some presentations on dynamic assessment before, but I was like, I would love to do this. I would love to figure out how we can offer trainings for this. I talked to the psychologist that developed it, and we had a few video calls, and he was like, I love this. That sounds great. And then like this year, I was switching from elementary to high school.
Yeah.
You know, I had my wedding to plan, and then it just kind of like, so I hope one day, like I'm not done with it. I'm obviously so passionate about it. When you hear me talk about it, I light up. I feel
Yeah.
like this is something that is so missing. And I am so confused. I polled everybody. Did your school even talk to you about dynamic assessment? And I know SLPs have a little more training in dynamic assessment, and I've talked to people that are in the UK, and I think in the UK, dynamic assessment has kind of like taken hold a little bit, and like a lot of them are trained on it and use it in their practice. But for whatever reason, it's just kind of, there was a movement, I think, in the 70s where people really got into it, and then it died off with people as they started retiring.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I totally see that as one area of passion that I have, that it's definitely, the flame is not out, but
Yeah.
have to figure out like how I can have time to do all the things that make me excited.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Like you're preaching to the choir. It's like every person I feel like I have on this podcast that I'm talking to, I love talking to people who are in this field because they get so passionate about the things that they love to do. And everybody just loves learning so much. And there's so
Yeah.
much in this field that we just like want to improve. And I know that like school psychologists, there's also a ton of burnout.
Mm.
And we have to kind of like stick with what it is that lights us up and helps, because it also helps the field grow, and then we can help others as we get good at whatever it is that we're doing. So no, I love it. And I love, yeah. And I can also imagine that, you're probably thinking a lot about something like this when you're in an elementary school and you have these SDCs, and then you go to high school and you've got a whole different population with a whole different group of things that you get interested in. And also you're like, oh my God, I have to learn about this and learn about that, So I'm excited to hear
Yeah.
about your experience there. And I also, before we get off of that topic though, do you know, do you know Natalie Corona?
Natalie Corona. That name sounds familiar, but I
She,
can't place.
so I'm pretty sure she still works for the Northern California Diagnostic Center, but she has worked for the Northern California Diagnostic Center, and she does these amazing presentations on it. It sounds similar to what you're talking about. I don't know if she actually incorporates the like the specific dynamic assessment, but she has all of this information for like kind of how to assess for intellectual disability, and like how to like really get creative and work with this population of students.
Cool.
Yeah, and she has this whole Padlet that I'm gonna send it to you because like I have it. Yeah, it's meaningful assessments for students with ID.
Oh,
And
I
she
love that.
has, yeah, and she's great. And like she does a lot of these talks with the Northern California Diagnostic Center. So they're like, I don't know, are they free, or maybe they're like really at low cost? They're not like that expensive, if anything. But anyway, she has like a bunch of training. So I'll send you this stuff, and I guess I'm plugging her right now. Maybe I need to have her on the podcast.
Yeah. Oh, I was gonna ask, has she been a guest for you?
No, she hasn't, but you're making me think about her. And she's also an LEP, but it's hard, like, because when you work for the diagnostic center, you're like working kind of like for the government, and they have some stipulations on the kinds of things that you can do and not do as like a private practice person, like, it's more stringent than if you're a school psychologist. If you're a school psychologist and you're working in this just district and you want to use your LEP, you can do whatever with like that district. But because she could actually work like all across Northern California, right? Like, yeah, there's
Okay.
some stipulations there. But she's wonderful and she's a great presenter, and I'm going to send you her stuff and I'm going to ask her to be on the show and talk all about this too.
Great. Sounds good.
Yeah. Yeah. So anyway, welcome to the podcast,
Thank
Briana.
I'm so glad to be here.
Yeah, I mean, we kind of just started getting right into it, and I was like, wait, I want to catch this on I was going to say on camera, kind of on camera, on audio. I'm really happy to have you here because I feel like you come from like a different generation than me, and you were doing something so cool with your just like with school psychology and sharing it with the world. And the purpose of the Empower LEP podcast is to kind of like talk about what people are doing with their LEP journeys, but it's like broader than that. It's kind of like, well, what else are you doing? Like, even if it's not specifically using your LEP, how did you get to where you are now? And how did you find the inspiration to use the knowledge that you have in a way that helps people in this whole other area of social media? Like, you're so visible and your content is so great. I don't know how you have the time in the day to do it. So I'm going to ask you all about that.
Okay.
But yeah, I want to hear your story and like kind of what your whole Instagram account and the resources that you have mean for you, and like how you like figured out that you wanted to do it and how you did this whole thing. So thank you for being on the show. And yeah, welcome.
Thank you. So it's actually interesting. When we were talking earlier, you were talking about how people light up and they get so excited about talking about things. And it reminded me of the name of my Instagram and why I created it.
Yep.
It's called Educationally Psyched. So obviously we're psychologists, but I'm like psyched, like excited.
Yep.
And really, I mean, the Instagram was born from a lot of things, but one of the main things is that I have so many like school psychology, education related things that I'm just so excited to talk about. And it's hard when you are a psych. Sometimes you're the only psych in your district, definitely like for a lot of us, the only psych at their school. And while you have a special ed team, you have counselors, you have admin who kind of understand what you do. It's not the same thing as like, teachers getting together and all being able to talk about what's going on in their school, because there's, a whole group of them. You have your grade level team, you have your content team. So I just found myself like wanting to really talk about a lot of topics and not having necessarily people to talk about it with. So the Instagram is a little bit of, me sharing my knowledge, but also just trying to connect to other school psychologists. Like, is anyone else interested in this? Does anyone else want to have a discussion with me? And then from a broader sense too, I really didn't like the division I'd see, not just online, but in real life too, where it's parents talking to other parents or parents talking to advocates and lawyers, and then school teams talking amongst themselves. And it's kind of like, we all want the same thing. We all want to support our students and watch them grow and watch them thrive. But we seem like we're on different teams sometimes. And that never sat right with me because our end goal is exactly the same. And so I really also wanted to create my Instagram as a way to not only just talk to other school psychologists, but talk to parents, people that had special education services during school and things were never explained to them. Just, anybody that's interested in these topics, and create a forum where it's okay for us to all talk together. And actually, it's better if we all talk together. And it doesn't have to be you versus me, us versus them. We all care. And if this topic is interesting to you, I want to make it accessible to you. I want to make it a place where you feel safe to share your opinion. If it's different, if you've had a bad experience, you can see that it's not always like that for other places. So I just didn't like the demonization that was going on of like, all advocates suck, or like all school teams want to give you as little as possible. So that's the other reason for my Instagram.
Yeah, well, it's so good. And first let me ask, do you find that you have a lot of like different kinds of followers? And so it's resonating with these different populations?
Yeah. And I think like I haven't done a poll about it in a while, but it's always interesting to see the makeup of it. But, when I ask a question, a lot of times, like on my story or in like the caption of one of the videos I've made, I specifically ask, what do you think, school teams, parents, like direct specific questions at them, former students with special education services, what do you think? And I love when I get replies from everyone. And I try to like sometimes repost it on my story in case it gets buried, like, look at this other opinion from this person. So
Yeah.
I definitely, it gives me a lot of joy when I see people from different groups. And obviously I wish, this stuff appealed to everybody. So I would always want more people that aren't from the school team to come, but I do think it's more people from schools. But
Right.
even within the school, there's some diversity. We have teachers, school psychologists, SLPs, school counselors, admin. And so even if it's mostly people from the school setting, there is different experiences that add such nuance to our conversations when we have those perspectives.
Yeah, I imagine it would be really useful for general education teachers,
Mhm.
because often, unless they've had a kid who's gone through the process, and even if not their own child, but like a child in their class, like some general ed teachers have never done it, or but even if they have, they sometimes have just a less informed understanding of what it is. I mean, I remember always, like, whatever new school I worked at, I would want to do training at the beginning of the year for a staff meeting, like about the process. And, just because there's so much. And, I remember being in meetings, like SST meetings, and we'd finish the meeting and the teacher would go like, so wait a second, I'm now have to do everything. Like, what, and you're like, oh, okay. Let me
Yeah,
help you understand this process.
there's definitely some confusion. My background, I was a teacher before I became a school psychologist. So I definitely have a lot of empathy for teachers. Still to this day, I would say that people ask me this, like teaching was harder than being a school psychologist.
Yeah.
And I will openly admit that it is just like the hardest job, I think. And so I have so much respect for teachers. And I also know what it feels like when a school psychologist tells you, do this, 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 and this. And you're like, you have clearly never been in charge of a classroom. Like,
Mm-hmm.
how on earth do you expect me to do that?
Mm-hmm.
So, I've been a school psychologist now for, I think this was the end of my seventh year. So it's been a while since I was a teacher. So I definitely know that, teaching through COVID is a whole different animal. And, it's been a
Yeah.
while, but I do have that empathy and understanding for teachers. And so, yeah, it's definitely like what you talked about with the SST, how they're like, I'm supposed to do all of this. I've been in that position, so I know. And so when I talk to teachers, I also understand that, like, from their perspective, it is a lot. And sometimes you need to, in good faith, be like, let me model it for you first. And then that's like a way to check, is this even feasible, what I'm asking them to do?
Right.
So I
Right.
know it's
I
like
I
interesting
also
dynamics.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I also think that school psychologists, or like LEPs, have this unique thing that we can offer the private sector too, because we get it. Like, we understand what's going on in schools and what's a feasible or rational thing to expect a teacher to be able to do within their classroom, versus people who do testing but have never worked in schools before.
Yeah.
They have a different perspective and different experience. So I think we have a unique little niche there in
Yeah,
that area.
totally. Yeah, I think the fact that, like, because all LEPs have to have had a couple years
Yeah.
working as a school psychologist, that I think that's a wonderful requirement too, just
Yeah.
to, even like I said with teaching, like even if it's been a while, like you still have that foundational understanding of what it's like that you can pull from and have that empathy and have that understanding, where as if you've never worked in that setting, like I don't know, I'm sure
Hmm.
you can do wonderful assessments. It's not me saying that, but just it's a
Yeah.
little added um, empathy and understanding.
Yeah. I also kind of going back to what you were saying about having like being able to talk to all of these different kinds of like parents and other kinds of educators on your Instagram. I completely understand what you're talking about with like so much adversity. And in private practice, one of the things we really try to do is help families understand as like this outsider perspective what's going on, like educate them about what's going on within their school team. Because we do get kids from public education coming to my practice, and sometimes they are just like, I don't even understand, like, I don't like this, about, especially if they're like, oh, we might want an IEE. I'm like, well, let me see what you have there. Like, let's take a look at this and see what you have. Because maybe you just don't, maybe you already have the information, but you don't quite understand it, right? Or they didn't explain it in a way that made sense to you at the time. IEP meetings are very emotional. Like sometimes you don't capture all of the information that's shared there. Let's look through it and see, like, is there actually a problem here? Or like, can I just help you understand this so you can go back and work with your team? Because knowing that the most important thing is that the school, like the parents and the school staff can work together for the betterment of this student. And so like before advocacy or anything adversarial happens, like let's try to like help empower you with this knowledge so that you feel better about going back and collaborating with the school team. So we do a lot of that kind of work.
Yeah, and I so appreciate that. I think a lot of the, people that work outside of the school setting, like as advocates or special education lawyers, or even like LEPs, I really appreciate connecting with those who have that mindset, because I do think it's really easy to go the other route where it's like, yeah, like let's show the school, let's stick it to the school, like you know what's best, and they're always trying to do you wrong. And you get a lot of like traction with that kind of mentality. People are like, yeah, I like that you're mad and I'm on your team. So I always appreciate connecting with people that have it in mind that, like, let's try to, and not saying that school teams are always innocent. I don't think that at all, but at least go into it like you said. Let's see what we have here. Maybe it's just a question of, did it not get explained as thoroughly as it should have been? And you're just like needing some support and understanding why they made this decision or why this process is the way it is. And yeah, that's also, what I hope to do with like the information I share on my Instagram too, is it's like, let's just try to understand, come from a place of understanding, so you're equipped to work with your team as best as possible and try to make it work. And then if it doesn't, then, obviously you have the right to seek other methods to make sure that rights are being respected.
Yeah, and I was doing a little homework on you before our episode. So I like listened to some of the podcasts that you've done in the past, and you said that you really like explaining assessment results to families and making sure that they have a good understanding of like what the information is that you're sharing in the IEP meeting, and you feel really confident in it and good about it. And that's like when I started working in private practice, because I did that for a very long time on the side before I am now solely in private practice, but I had this other like perspective. I got this other perspective, like, oh, like they don't know anything about this process. Parents are so in the dark when they come into this. And a lot of times as a school psychologist, you just kind of get in this flow where you just like, you're so familiar with all of it that it's hard to go back to the basics. And having this other perspective and talking to parents outside of the school system, I realized how much they needed to be informed. And we always like say that, but I don't know that I was putting it into practice in the same way that I did after I started working in private practice. So it really helped me better, elevate my practice as a school psychologist, because I could say, I also like felt like I had more credibility, because I'd go like, well, in my private practice, like I would yeah, like I would call this ADHD, you know, but I'm not allowed to call it that here because that's not what we're doing here. Like here, I'm not diagnosing it, but I'm saying we see characteristics like that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, and then go like, oh, okay. Like, so just even something as simple as that, or it just really helped me like get grounded with families and start from the beginning. Like this is an initial evaluation. Do you understand what that is? Let me tell you what that is. Let me tell you like what this process is like that you're going to go through and what we're ultimately going to have at the end of this. And then when you come to that meeting, what you can expect. And then, what, and all of it, we just kind of like run through them like next meeting, next meeting, next meeting. So I love the information that you're sharing. That was a very long-winded way of saying, I love the information that you're sharing on your social media because I think it helps people who may not be school psychologists get that kind of insight without, like just like, oh, I didn't realize that. Okay.
Yeah. And that is what I find too, is that it's like nobody ever took the time to sit down and explain things in a way, like even really simple things like what is an individualized education program? Like what does IEP even stand for?
Right. Right.
And you get, and it's, I don't say that to bash school teams because I'm on a school team.
Yeah. Yeah.
You get so in the flow of
Right.
like, everybody knows what an IEP is, or like you've had so many meetings like this before. Like everybody just knows, we gotta get through it. We only have an hour to do it. We gotta go. Um, and I've had such great conversations with other school psychologists about it because they're like, oh, I should really slow down and make sure that people understand what I'm talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And that has been, you were asking me before earlier about like the transition to high school. This has been the biggest like aha, like light bulb moment for me being in high school, because not only do we want the parents to understand, the kids really, really need to understand. And I am at the end of the line now in high school, and it's very easy to be like, oh, they're elementary school kids. Like, they don't need to be concerned with this. This is like above their level. This is a little too adult. Like, they don't need to come to the meetings. We don't really need to tell them what this is for. And then they're in middle school. You're like, maybe they should come to the meetings, but like they don't need to know like what their eligibility category is. And we'll talk around it or invite them to just part of the meeting and like, tell them what their goals are or whatever. And then they get to high school where now I'm at, and it's like, oh, you don't even know you have an IEP. You don't know what that means.
Mm-hmm.
Or if they do know what that means, do you know what your IEP is even for? And then now we're expecting them to be adults going into work, going into college, advocating for themselves, potentially, working with the disability center at their college to request accommodations. And the accommodations are not going to just magically appear for them. Their parents can't call and say like, make sure you're giving my kid extra time on that test. Like they don't, that's not how it works. And so I think now working with high schoolers, like it is too late to start those conversations with high schoolers in high school.
Yeah.
And I don't know if I would have ever known that if I didn't work with the high school population, because you're always just kind of like pushing it down the line.
Right. Right.
So yeah, I mean, all of that is to say like parents need to understand this better, and we need to do a better job of like onboarding them and reminding them, like first at the initial meeting, yeah, like special ed 101, like you could take a class, or there's like a parent night for that and you learn about it, or anything. Just give them the information that they need to understand the process and be a good advocate for their child and understand what's going on. But then also the kids too, we can't forget about them. They are, the whole thing is about them. Everything we're doing is about them. So I just don't even understand how they're so forgotten. And yeah, we don't necessarily consider like, do they understand what testing was for? And that's been so valuable with the people I used to only just like talk to, parents and school teams. And now I say, if you had special education as a child, and, I want to hear from those people.
Yep.
Because so many of them were so confused by the process. They were like, oh, I think I had an IEP. I would go to this room, every Tuesday and Thursday to like do reading with this lady. She was nice. She gave me candy sometimes. They're like, was that special education? And they went through their whole entire education, not knowing, went off to college, obviously never got accommodations there because they had no idea that they could even do that.
Mm.
They're finding out later, like, oh, I was diagnosed with this when I was 5. You never told me that. And it's just,
Yep. Yeah.
that's been my newest, biggest passion being in high school. I'm like, we need to do better for our kids too. Parents as well, like you're talking about, like make sure they understand, but kids too.
Yeah. Oh my God, I could like go on and on and on with you about these things. Because now you're making me think. I'm not going to go on and on, but I will say it also makes me just think about how the purpose of having an IEP is to work yourself out of having an IEP, And that's also something that if I could go back in time, I would have wanted more families. I would have wanted to talk to families more about that, because you want like, and teachers too. I think teachers, like special education teachers, sometimes lose sight of that.
Mm.
It's not that you just like go year to year and they're always going to have an IEP. And so the whole goal is these kids have to make a faster rate of progress so that they can get back to where that's what special education is for. It's why SLD is not supposed to be for kids who are just kind of, like hanging all around the same area, right? It's because it's supposed to be specific. Now, do I agree that those are the only kids who should get special education? No, but the idea there, but like, then you have to like, fit them in somehow. But like the idea is that we're going to provide a special education service and you're going to catch back up in that area, or you are going to like make a faster rate of progress. And for the other kids, it's like, well, they're functioning around where they should be, so they don't need anything specialized for that, right? Which is total BS. Like, obviously they need something specialized, but like they don't qualify, and like that's a horrible thing to say. That's another thing I could go on and on.
The other thing, and this is something that like is a huge misconception that I'm always talking about too, is that there is different prongs of eligibility for a reason. It's not just that you have a disability. It's you have a disability that's having an educational impact that requires specialized education.
Right.
And so that's not to say, when the way you were describing that, I could see someone that's not familiar with special education and what eligibility is about. It's like, well, if they have dyslexia, they're always going to have dyslexia. So why would they not have an IEP?
Right.
So that's the other thing that I think that to really understand, especially what you were saying before about like, having your LEP and having that experience of working in the school and understanding the difference between like a DSM diagnosis and school eligibility and being able to walk parents through that, is that there's a lot of frustration. Autism is another example. My kid was diagnosed with autism. Why don't they have an IEP? They need an IEP. That's their right. And there's just a lot of confusion around that. And, this should be absolutely explained in depth. This is the eligibility requirements. Being autistic, having that diagnosis is just one part of eligibility requirements. And if the school doesn't do a good job of really thoroughly explaining that, showing the parents the eligibility, explaining that to them, showing them the data for educational impact or requiring specialized services, the parents are going to leave mad and confused and think, go to get their private assessment and say like, help me because they
Right.
try to pull one over on me.
Right. And the schools, I think, also need to do a better job of saying, like, that this may not be what they need, but this is what we're going to do, and
Yeah.
it's not in an IEP, but it's like it can be like black or white, right? Unless you have a really strong MTSS, but then you have to be able to describe what it is and how that is that you're going to help the kid, or else, yeah, you're going to get upset parents. So,
Yeah. And that's the hard part about schools too. And I obviously know a lot of things wrong with schools, and I'm very critical of schools, but a lot of places it's special education or nothing.
right, right,
So yeah, maybe it's better for a student to like have an intervention, or, like they don't really meet eligibility requirements, but then what?
right.
What are you going to do for them? And I don't have an answer for that. I have worked in schools that have really built up RTI processes, like different interventions at every tier, and you have extra staff or support staff that are really like hired to be the expert in that area, and it's not just on the teacher to like provide all these extra things in the class with they can't do. But then I've also been in schools where, yeah, right. Like,
Yeah,
if you're saying no to special education, then that kid just went right back to general ed and getting as much differentiation as the teacher can manage, but that's pretty much it.
right. Wouldn't it be great if we were at a meeting where a kid didn't qualify and the principal was like, but you know what we are going to do? And like took it over, right? Because a lot of times the school psychologist is just kind of like, sorry, and and then and then the parents like, well, what are we going to do then? Oh, that's for a different meeting. Or like, you're going to have to go back and talk to somebody else about that. Like, I mean, it puts a psychologist in a really bad position
Mm-hmm.
because you're not responsible for what the general education then does, right? Like,
Yeah,
if there were only more hours in a day and more and like less problems in education, like that would be like utopia, right? Like,
yeah,
well, you're
for
not going
sure.
to get special education, but obviously your kid needs some support. And this
Yeah,
is what we've brainstormed it looking like. What do you think, parents? Like that would
totally.
be so much better.
I actually did make a video about this too. Like, if a child is not eligible for special education services, here are, I think it's like 4 different things that you need to make sure are communicated in the meeting. And one of them was like, what next?
Yeah.
If it's
Yeah.
not special education, what is there? And interesting, you point out that it's like all eyes on the school psychologist, like what should you do? And that totally absolutely happens. My way of dealing with that, or not dealing with that, but
Yeah.
navigating that is making sure that I use the information, at least from my testing, to give some strategies. Like, this was an area, maybe they don't have any areas of like processing weakness or whatever, but maybe one area was a little bit stronger. So
Hmm.
you use their strengths that you found to say, like, try this, like, here's some tips for how to present material, or some supports that you can add in with like visuals and, I don't know, manipulatives or whatever. Just so there's something, because I definitely have been in meetings where I've had amazing teachers that are just like ready to take notes on
Yeah.
everything that I'm saying. And that makes me so happy. I
Yeah.
love working with teachers like that.
Right.
And they're really like, if you don't have anything for them, then
Yeah.
they're like, wait, I was here ready to learn from you.
Yeah.
So I want that, having a teacher like that, my first teacher that was like that, I was like, okay, I need to present in a way that I'm assuming that all my teachers are like that. They're ready for information like that. And parents too, because
Yeah.
parents want to take away concrete things that they can adjust and do at home.
Yep.
So it's not just like, I if we don't have an intervention for them at school, there's still kind of strategies or things that you've learned. You've done hours of testing at that point. You've
Hmm.
learned something about the way a kid learns.
Yeah.
So there's something you can pass along as a psychologist to be like, maybe this is a good approach for them. And it doesn't even have to be test results wise. It can even just be like their demeanor and their temperament, or like when I did this, when I added in these behavioral supports to get them to attend to the task I was doing, like they did a lot better. When I gave them the little fidget while we were working, it didn't distract them at all. They were actually like even more focused when they had something in their hand.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
using all of that to kind of help is what I like to do.
And yeah, because especially because teachers, if they don't qualify, right, the teachers are also just like, oh my God, what am I going to do? Like they just went through this whole process and now I'm like telling you guys like they're struggling, you know, so.
Yeah.
Well, this is a really good segue into like, I understand kind of how you got the concept for your Instagram. What I really want to know is like, how do you get so good at that?
Oh gosh.
Like, where do you find the time? How long does it take you? How do you fit this into your life? And then how do you monetize it? Because, right, this is a little side business for you.
Yeah,
So
it's
I want to
actually
know. Yeah.
Yeah, it's actually, I mean, it's not like I can quit my job and live off of it, but it's definitely a nice little like side income for me. More so in the last like year or two when I started sharing my materials that I made. That was what I think a lot of people latched onto. So I'll talk about that in a
Yeah.
second. I'll answer your question of how I find the time. You'll have to ask my husband because he's the one that's like getting neglected a little bit when I'm like on my phone, like I gotta respond.
Not
Yeah,
even respond. It's like you have these videos and it's like, now I'm in this, now I'm over here, now I'm over here, now I'm over here. I have the words. Like, how do you do all that? Like, I am
I'm
like,
also a big consumer of social media. So like I kind of see things and I'm like, ooh, I like how that person did that. Like, let me see if I can try to do that. And then it's also a little bit of like seeing what sticks. Like sometimes it's like, oh, there's this really funny audio that people are lip syncing to. And I think like that reminds me of this specific situation in that I deal with every day. Like, let me like use this and relate it to school psychology, and people will get a laugh about that. And sometimes they don't. And you're like, okay, never mind. But where I get a lot of like requests from people, which is cool. They're like, I don't know how I would explain the exclusionary factors of SLD. Like, how do you even explain that? And I'll be like, oh, that's a really good idea. Let me make a video on it. And so I'll spend time, usually it's like before work, I'll get here and I'll like write out a script for myself or like practice a little bit and record it. Or like sometimes on my lunch break, or sometimes I'll stay late. So it's definitely not like the most sustainable way to live. Like I definitely spend a lot of time with it, but I also get a lot of like joy and excitement from it. Like we were talking about with like being educationally psyched. Like I was so starved for these kind of conversations with other people that get it, that get what we do, that care about the same things as I care about. So when I'm responding to people or like making specific videos that are requested of me and I get that feedback of like, wow, this was really helpful, like it makes me feel so good that it's like, it sustains me in that way, even though it's like a lot of extra work. I'm not gonna lie, it's like, it's definitely a second job with not second job salary, but I like it. So
for
it's
sure.
helpful.
Yeah.
But the form, so I'm one of those people that's definitely like very critical of forms. I'm a very like efficient person. I like things to be clean. I like things to get to the point. I like it to be visually appealing. And that's always been my problem. Like when I get, I think I got in trouble in graduate school a couple times because like they'd make us fill out like this Google form and then also this like sheet. And I'm like, can it just be combined into one? Like, why do I have to do both of these? And some professors don't like it when you question that kind of thing. But I really just like, I don't understand. Like, I can make this so much more efficient, just like me too. So I've been doing that. Like, luckily I've had pretty good directors of special education that aren't like, you have to use my form. And like, even I just had my evaluation and I gave some of my forms to my director and I was like, we can use these if you want. Like, I'm happy to use them just myself, or if you like them and want everybody to use it, I'm cool with that too. So that's always great to be supported in that way. But so I'd be using all my forms. I've been doing this my whole career, just making my own. And then it would be like someone would see it in like the background of my video, or I'd be just like explaining something and there would my form be, and people would be like, what's that? How do I get one of those? And so I started putting my forms up on Teachers Pay Teachers, and I just got such an amazing response to them. And that's where I've gotten, I don't get like paid for, like selling people things. Like companies come to me and be like, can you tell people to buy this? Like, I don't like messing around with all of that. But if it's my form, I use it. I know it works. I can stand behind it. I'm happy to share it with people. And, the response has been really great to that, because I think people can tell I'm really genuine about it. I use it and I can tell you how to use it. And I have videos on how to use it. So
Yeah. That's
it's
awesome.
really awesome to like be able to share that with people, because I put in a lot of work in them. So if other people can get benefit from that, more kids can get benefit from that, I'm all for that.
Right. No, that's great. I mean, and there are definitely those of us who are good at those kinds of things and those of us who are not, and I'm one of those people. I can't like find anything. I'm like, oh, where did I put that form in my Google Drive? Or like I open up social media, and I'm like, okay, I can take a video of myself and I know how to put captions on now. And that's like the extent, right? I'm like, what is all this like edit? I can't. And I'm kind of the same way with forms. Like, I know what I want it to look like. I know what I want it to say, but me implementing that and putting that into something that captures everything that I want, it's not my strong suit. So I'm always looking for things that I can take and use that other people have already put together where I don't have to do it. So I think that's amazing.
And that's like, that was one of the hurdles I think I had to get past, because I was like, oh, well, why would anyone want to buy my forms? Then they could just make their own. But there's really people that are like, I'm happy to pay you that $3 just to have what you had, and like maybe even edit it if I don't like certain things about it, or just use it as is. Like, I will happily give you that like $3 to $5 for that form. And I didn't know if that was, I don't know how to price them. I don't know what it's worth to people. And so I was like worried, like, oh, people will think, it's not worth the $5 or whatever. But, I guess like there really is a market for that, where people are just like, thank you for doing all the thinking and the designing for me. You saved me. If anything, like $5 is like not enough. So I'm like, oh,
yeah. So when you think about your future and like what this is turning into, because now you have like a book club and I get your things and I'm like, oh my God, I don't even have time to read this. Like how is she's reading the book, she's making comments. I don't even I don't want to unsubscribe because first, I don't even know how. Second,
I can show you. If you don't want the notifications, I'll show you.
Yeah. But then I'm like, I just don't know how you have the time to do this. Like, you're so efficient with all of it. Like, it just must come like second nature to you. Because for me, it's like learning a new language. Like, trying to do social media is like learning a new language. And it is crazy. Like I said, I come from a different generation. Like, there was none of this even when I was a school psychologist. Like, I stopped being a school psychologist in 2018, and which is probably around when you were getting started, right? And right.
So I graduated in 2017. Yeah.
Okay.
So.
Yeah. And then I became a program specialist. So like, even like in those last couple of years, like social media was not anything like it is now. Like, it has just gone like beyond. I mean, I wake up in the middle of the night just like afraid that like AI is going to just start writing our reports, and are we even going to have a job? I mean, literally, I'm like,
that's a real fear.
Yeah.
Not to make you scared.
Yeah, no, I know. I'm like, just like, let's not go down that rabbit
I
hole.
know that's a whole another topic.
And I feel like, like kind of behind the eight ball on things like that. Like, oh my
Mm,
God, like, wait, what's happening? And then I start thinking about, this is totally off topic, but then I start thinking about like, well, what are they going to do in schools? And are our assessments even going to be matching what kids' experiences are? Like, and like the kids that these were normed on are not the kids of today. And so,
yeah.
like, does this even make sense that we're giving these tests? What does it even have to do with? They don't even do math like this anymore.
Mm.
Oh, if only
Yeah,
people
there's a lot
knew.
of questions about that.
Right. So, okay. Well, we're not going to go down that rabbit hole. What
Okay.
I, okay. Well, I'm going to get back to my original question, which is like, where do you see this going? What are your plans for yourself? How, I know that you have your LEP and
Mm.
like, does like using that at some point ever come into the mix? Like, just what do you
Yeah.
think for yourself?
So one of my former coworkers, I think actually she's been a guest on your podcast,
Oh, who?
Crawford.
Oh, yeah, Erin.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Erin and I worked together and she started her private practice this year. And
Yes.
we've been talking about like how I can come on in a small way or maybe
Yeah.
eventually a bigger way. And I was thinking about, just doing summer assessments, helping her out with that, like any overflow she had. But this is actually a good timing for us to be talking because when we were originally supposed to talk, I hadn't even come up with this idea yet. So now I can
Oh,
share it. It's very new.
cool. Yeah.
But with all of the conversation, like I told you, that I've been having lately about really caring about kids understanding their results, I was talking to her and I was like, what might be cool is if I come on as maybe doing evaluations, or just like a supplement to your evaluations, having sessions with kids, because I know that it's really intimidating for some parents to explain it to their kids. Like, okay, now I got this assessment done. How on earth do I tell my kid about this in a way that's not going to scare them or not going to be this like negative thing? And they need some guidance on like how to share that with their kid. And I love that. That is one of the things that I've had the most joy this school year working with high school kids, is going over their results with them. I created a form for it to kind of like go through the conversation, focus on like their strengths and their areas of needs, and frame the conversation in a way it's not like number focused, but really, unless that's something the kid is interested in, because some kids really want to see the numbers, they want to see the bell curve, they want to understand that. Some kids just kind of want to know, what do I need to take from this? Like,
Hmm.
what do I need to make sure my teachers know about me? Like, what do I need to do to help myself get through this class?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I was thinking like maybe I could do some sort of, I'm tossing around like different names for it, but one name that I came up with preliminary is self-advocacy coaching,
Hmm.
just to kind of like, have a scope that it's like maybe 3 sessions where, you're talking about just in general, kind of like an extended student interview, like what's going on at school, what's going on when you try to learn, really getting into like a one-on-one conversation, really hearing them out and understanding where they're coming from as a learner.
Yeah.
And then, relating that in another session to their results. You said this is what your testing shows, this is what I found in the evaluation, or this is what, Erin found in the evaluation. And then the next session, or like the following sessions, if it's more than one, how can I relate this to real life? How can I advocate in my classes? How can I make sure that my teacher, my college, my whoever, my parents understand this about me? And how can I be empowered to tell them, to understand it myself, and also communicate it with
Yeah.
other people? So that's been my most recent idea. I don't know if there's like people out there doing that. I'm sure it's not like a completely original idea, but I was telling Erin, I was like, that would be really fulfilling to me. And it would be something that would be, I'd think, more sustainable to do than taking on a bunch of evaluations.
Yeah.
something maybe I could do after work, or because, I have so much free time.
Right. All with all that free time. No, I love that. And I think that feedback with kids is really kind of it's trending right now.
Cool. So I'm not original.
Well, I mean, like Liz Angoff is very much into giving feedback to kids.
Oh,
And
yeah, Erin was telling me about her.
oh, yeah. Yeah. I
I don't know if
just
you
did
guys
a
talked
podcast.
about that.
No, because I did a podcast with Liz. It came out a couple of weeks ago. Yeah. So listen to it if you haven't. But we didn't really talk about her feedback with kids in that talk because I was like interviewing her about her life. But she's been on many other like the testing psychologist and other podcasts where she talks about that. And so it's, she has some resources too.
Oh,
I'm gonna check out your feedback with kids form because that like we kind of make up our own here, kind of based on her form.
oh, cool.
But I always love to see like different things and like, like what do we want ours to look like? But I think it's incredibly important. So we do like a feedback session with the kids, like after we do the feedback session with the parents, usually it's separate. We don't do it for every case, but we do it for a lot of them. But I could totally see that being like, you know, um, this is your educational psychologist and your educational psychologist tested you. And now you either have the same one that's going to meet with you a couple of times to like really take what we've learned about your brain into your life. And,
Mm.
or here is Briana, and Briana is going to now work with you on these things that we learned about you, which I think is totally doable. And then I
Mhm.
could even see it being like something that you like have touch points throughout like a school year, so that you can see how are things working for you, right?
Totally. That would
Yeah,
be, and that's the
love it.
other thing that I do miss about I think I kind of created this for myself in high school because I used to have like a counseling caseload in younger grades, but in high school, it's just like there's too many assessments. So we have MFTs that do our counseling caseload. And I miss that relationship with kids, and you get it a little bit for testing, but you're only really meeting with them for like a few sessions. And then I like see them later and I remember them and maybe they don't remember me, but I do feel like when I have these feedback meetings, either at the request of parents or, the kid asks me like, can you explain what that meant? That's how this whole process got developed is like I created a form for it because I was like I want them to come away with something, and the form I have right now is just like I think it's a little bit older. I'd say it's more geared to high school. I people have asked me like, well, how do you do this with elementary?
Yeah.
So I'm still like brainstorming what that's going to look like. But yeah, like I really love that connection with kids, and then it's like I never want to be that nice lady that met me with me one time and then I have no idea what that was for, because you hear a lot of adults that got testing like that, like, oh, I remember those blocks, some lady did that with me and then that
Mhm.
was it, and
Mhm.
they never knew like what became of that, and unless their parents went through it with them, or like you said, there's a feedback session afterwards, a lot of the time the testing was just for the parent
Right.
and the kids left to like kind of guess like
Yeah.
I mean I guess now I get services or whatever, but I
Yeah.
don't want to be that lady that just like did something and then bye, have a nice
Mhm.
life.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's fulfilling to me to get to see them make that connection and make meaning of the work that I just did.
Yeah. I love that. I think that that could be a totally sustainable and helpful service, like supplemental service to what Erin's already providing. And she's wonderful. And did you work together? Did you work in the same district?
Yeah, we were in the same district just for 1 year, well, a year and a half, and then
Yeah.
she went full private practice. But we keep in touch, and
Yeah.
actually, we're gonna get stream of consciousness, like sent her a bunch of text messages, like I think it was yesterday, honestly, like this is what I think I should do. And
Yeah.
like, sounds great. When should we meet about it? So we're gonna meet on Wednesday, actually. So
Ugh, I
I'll
love
give her. We're
that.
gonna form the idea a little bit more
Cool.
together.
Very cool. Very cool. And your high school, are you going to stay at high school next year?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I would have never guessed. And that's
Yeah.
one of the things I've been having such great conversations with like other school psychologists because I shared at the end of last year, I was devastated when they
Mhm.
moved me. And that's a reality of working as a school psychologist. It's like you work for the district. They put you where they need you. And some departments handle it a little bit better than others. Like they let you rank your choice, they do seniority, and some are just like tough.
Yeah.
You're moving. Sorry, you get no say. And that's kind of how I felt. And I have a good relationship with my director of special education. So I'm like not mad at him, but I was mad at him at the time for
Yeah.
sure. And
Yeah.
I let him know because I'm trained as a bilingual school psychologist and I was in the only bilingual school. And I was like, how are you going to do that?
Right.
You're not thinking about the bigger picture here. So I was confused and upset. And I had never worked with high school kids before. And to be honest, I was a little scared of them. I
Yeah.
was like, I'm an elementary school psychologist. Like,
Right.
I was a kindergarten teacher. Like, this is what I know. This is what I'm good at. And I went in kind of begrudgingly thinking like, I'll do it for the year and then I'm getting out as soon as they allow me to. But I am happily staying here next year. So
Awesome. Yeah.
surprise myself.
Yeah. Well, I will say that like just having a pretty long school psychology career, like the more experiences I got with different populations, the more it really kind of formed my areas of interest,
Mhm.
specialty. I saw where I liked to be. I saw where I didn't like to be as much. I appreciated each one for what I got, and I was in high schools for 2 years, then I was a program specialist in high schools for 4. So like I learned so much about that population. And I also tested in private practice a lot of kids who are in high school. But
Mm.
in my school psychology like world, I went back to elementary because I really liked kind of that like first assessment kind of thing of like littler kids. But
Mm.
having not had that experience, I wouldn't have seen where those kids get to, right? And like what impact, if you don't help them here, what does that look like down the road?
Yeah, that's exactly what I was saying too in the beginning. It's like I didn't realize that by delaying inviting kids into these conversations until the end of middle school till high school, you're setting them up for failure because now you have all these high school kids that really and they also feel lied to a little bit
Yeah,
too. They're like, wait, I have had this for since I was in third grade and nobody thought to tell me.
right, right.
And you step back from that and you're like, oh yeah, that is kind of mean. That's kind of cruel to do to withhold this kind of information from someone about their own brain that
Yeah,
you did all these tests for.
yeah.
So yeah, I would have never had that understanding until being at the end of the line and saying like, oh yeah, this is how it ends up and this is how they feel
Yep.
when you wait this long. And I wouldn't have ever known that as an elementary school psych.
Absolutely. And you also kind of understand why it's so important to build executive skills in younger kids and how they need to be able to do those things so that when they get to high school and off into adulthood, they are not enabled, right? They're not like disabled, I guess, right? Like they're not like, oh, someone's been doing this for me the whole time, right? And that's a conversation with parents I
Totally.
often have too. Like, we need them to, at some point, do it themselves, right? And
Yes.
you're going to have to be their coach until they are ready to, but,
Mhm.
they're not going to get it the first time, right? Like, but you can't give up on them and you're going to have to like wean it off because they ultimately will have to fly on their own. Or if they can't, what are accommodations going to look like at that point, or what are supports going to look like at that point? But
Totally.
yeah, I mean, getting the gamut of experience is something that I wish on every school psychologist, whether they're forced into it or not.
Yeah, and that's what I was saying with like the conversations I've been having. I like, shared that story and shared how I was mad and how I went through the emotions of it and then like, tried to look on the bright side. And here I am on the other side a year later. And I'm like, this was probably the best thing that could have happened for me. And so people that are now getting news that they're not going to be at their school or whatever, or they're going to be in a different grade level than they originally wanted, they're like, I'm right there where you were last year. Like, how did you get through this?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm happy to say, and like you said, like maybe it's not the perfect fit, but it adds something to your
Absolutely.
toolkit. And so that's the other message I said. Like, I'm grateful that I'm like, yay, I really liked it. I'm gonna stay another year here. But it could have been like, I don't like high school. I knew I didn't like it. And I would still, if that was my experience, I still would have thought that this was positive because I learned some things. And even if you
Absolutely.
learned this is not the population for me, that's still, something that you learned, and you wouldn't have known that. You wouldn't have had that experience had you not been pushed into it.
Yeah.
So I do think there's always a lesson in everything. And sometimes the lesson is like, that's not for me, but at least, you can take that away from the experience.
Yep, absolutely. Well, this has been a fabulous conversation. And tell our audience again where people can find you and, on all the platforms.
So on Instagram, it's at educationally psyched. And on my Instagram, there's like the link to my Teachers Pay Teachers. But if you go on that website, I think you can just look up educationally psyched. My profile is the same name, and that's where all my resources are. And I don't have, like you said, you can only focus on so much. I don't have a TikTok. That's a whole another language too. You'd think it's the same thing, but there's different things that go well on there. I have a Threads, which is like the Instagram's Twitter. Even that's a different language. Things go really viral on there that like nobody cares about on my Instagram. So I also have a Threads if you want to follow me there. But
Yeah.
those are my only ones.
Okay. I signed up for Threads and then I'm like, I have no idea what this is. And I am just getting off of it right now before I don't even
Yeah.
know. I don't have a
Like
Twitter.
the Threads is like little thoughts, but I found like I've gone more like viral on Threads than I've ever gone on Instagram because I don't know what it is with their algorithm. It pushes it out to everybody. And in Instagram, I really only get people that like follow people similar to me or like are interested in my topics. But so I'll have for example, the other day I had something about um what was it? It was like graduation on if I should wear if you should wear your like hood or doctoral regalia or whatever, or if that's like, too extra or whatever. And it was like, I think like a million people saw it and everyone's giving their opinion. I was like, who are you? you're you're not a school psych. Like
Yeah.
your
I'd be
kid's
like,
not in high school. Because I think like the key words of like high school or graduation, and then it just like sent it to the masses, and I'm like
wow.
getting mean replies. I'm like, these are not my usual audience. I want to go back
Uh-huh.
to my nice little school psych world.
I know it's like you put yourself out there in the world and you put yourself out there for like criticism or like whatever. It's kind of scary. Like, and even just like having to respond to things. Like when I see that I have like a bunch of notifications on Facebook, like I'm like, oh my God, when am I gonna have time to do that? Like they're gonna think I'm ignoring them or
Yeah, I know. I could definitely use like working hours because like when you're on social media, there's not like a contract of like I work from 8 to 4 or whatever. So
Yeah.
it's like really, if you're not careful, you are answering things at all times of the day. And that tends to be me sometimes. So it's definitely something I need to work on.
Well, I applaud you because this is like a whole other world. I don't have a TikTok either. I cannot even get into that. But it's
That one's not for me.
yeah. Um, what was I going to ask you? Oh, I was gonna say, like, you should, think about all those areas of interest that you have and like start giving talks at conferences. Like, really,
I know.
like you had that
That's the
idea, like
next step for sure.
but you don't have to even do it, like it would be like a lot to put together a talk for a dynamic assessment, but it may not be as much to put something together that's really practical for like, the different forms you use and the this and the that. And obviously you're not supposed to like promote yourself at these things, right? You're kind of more
Yeah.
like giving back to your community, but that's what you do all the time
Yeah.
anyway. But like this idea that you have about student feedback and what you've been doing and just sharing your practices, I think people would really love to hear stuff like that.
Thank you. Cause I think like you build it up so much as like speaking at a conference. I have to have some groundbreaking research or like, be like the top person in my field, or else why would anyone want to come see me talk? But I actually was asked, one of the things that I think kind of got me a little bit in that realm was I've had some grad programs contact me to ask if I could talk to they have like meetings every month where they invite people to come talk to them. So I've talked to a few like school psych college programs, and one of them asked me, you know, what's a topic that you would like to talk to us about? So I've done like bilingual assessments. And then one that I really loved was like organization. And that was like so easy and so fun for me to put together. And it was like, like you said, there wasn't like a big barrier to entry with that. It's
Yeah.
like, I don't have to do any research. It's just like what I do, how I stay organized. And I got really positive feedback for that. And it's just like, here's how I organize my caseload. Here's how I make sure like I'm on track with my due dates. Like, here's how I speak with my special education team. Here's like and not even the forms I use. Like, obviously, like you said, you can't like self-promote, but even just like in general, here's a type of form to use, like
Or
a
you could
long
just give them
keep track.
away. It's like
Yeah,
people just have, they come to your training and then you put them
well,
in a
free.
Google folder. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, funny, like a couple of years ago at CASP, I actually did one of those little mini skills, it was like a short one, like an hour and something minutes. And it was called Running a Tight Ship. And I was still a school psychologist at the time. And like, even though I'm not a forms person, I was like definitely at like, I'm in charge of all the whole calendar for like every meeting we have during the year. And I do all the emails out to like all the different players to make sure that everybody gets to that meeting. Like, I'm not going to sit in a room and not have the parent show up, So
Yeah.
I like shared all of my processes, and you get like, newer and older school psychologists like coming and being like, yes, like, what are you doing? Like, help me organize. Like, people want to hear from practitioners, whether it's about organization, whether it's about child feedback. Like, I think people really want to hear from practitioners. The episode that came out today is with Dr. Julie Getman, and she runs the school neuropsych institute. And we were talking about, like sharing at conferences, like people really wanting to hear from the practitioner perspective.
Mhm.
Not that they don't want to hear from researchers, but they really want to hear from practitioners too. And sometimes it's a little one-sided, right? So it like a lot of researchers and less practitioners. So it's a lot of work to like put talks together, but I think the field wants it and benefits from it. Plus, you're an influencer, so people would come.
I've never like that term has never like ring true to me. I don't feel that.
It's what's weird is that once you get into business, right, you have to think like a business owner, and you have to like, which is different from being a school psychologist.
Yeah, I don't have that like
It's
mind for that.
very weird. And also like, oh, like, you know, I've got to, like, what am I supposed to post about today? I've got to do something, like, because this
I
is,
know that's when I get in that mode though, that's when I know that like whatever I post is not going to do well. It's like the best things come from me just being like, oh, I had this thought randomly pop in my head. And like, it's actually funny. The videos that you spend the most time on are usually the ones that do the worst. And I think it's because it really comes through when you're just like genuinely like, this is something I want to share with the world. And people are like, oh, I'm so glad you shared that.
Mhm.
And it's like, okay, I need to curate this because this is what I'm supposed to be saying to the world. And they're like, I've heard that. You didn't even say that well. Like,
Yeah.
no thanks. Just
Well,
little insider tip from
yeah,
an
thank you. I
just
actually like don't even look. I have no idea how anything does. I feel like I just have to like I'm just like trying to stay like in front of mind.
Mm.
So I'm like, even if they like scroll and nobody even like looks at it, here's Jana's face for like a second, right? That's fine with me.
There's something that, if you like follow any like content creator specialist people. I think that's like a whole job now, is like people that tell you how to be a content creator or whatever.
Yeah.
They do say that, like, there's something to be said about like just your face being on people's feed. And even if they don't like what you're saying, they know your face. And so they're more likely to like look at your stuff because they're like, I remember that face.
Yeah.
So there's something to be said about that. That's definitely a strategy for sure.
I like don't look at stories, which I know you're actually supposed to do because that's where you see actually people that you know versus when you scroll and you just see like a bunch of ads.
I love stories. Those are my favorite.
I like just haven't really figured it out yet. And like, I don't even really know how to like add to story. I do a little bit, but mostly I don't even know. I don't know. I have like people who, sometimes I'll post something and then my people who help with marketing will be like, I posted this to your story. And I'll be like, great, thank you. Because I'm not quite sure how to do it, or I don't know really where it shows up, or.
You're totally right, though. It is like learning another language, and you gotta practice. You gotta learn from others and like watch kind of what they're doing to like copy a little bit. And
apparently now I should be holding a fluffy microphone up.
oh, I don't do that.
Have you seen that? Now
I have seen that. Yeah, I don't know. I think it definitely makes like the sound crisper, I think.
Right.
So people like that.
But they're not even like putting it on their lapel. They're like, I'm just going to hold this thing in front of my face. I'm like,
I think people like realness, I guess. So maybe that's like, like subconsciously like, oh, look, they're not like a professional with it there. They're just real.
I'm going to get one.
I look forward to seeing you with your fluffy mic on my feed. Lots of your face.
I'm going to write that down. Fluffy mic.
Fluffy mic. I didn't know it was fluffy.
Well, so they're like, I don't know. They look like they have like it looks like a little stuffed animal. I don't know. I'm going to get it. And then I'm going to be like, shout out to Briana. Educationally psyched. I'm going to invite you as a collaborator.
I don't know anything about the fluffy mics. I should get credit for that.
Yeah, I'm gonna teach you something.
Okay, cool. Maybe if it starts sounding very crisp, I'm gonna take that idea for myself and be like, you know what? I also want to sound crisp and carry a
fluffy mic. Yeah, yeah. Well, this has been a phenomenal conversation. Thank you so much. It was so great getting to know you.
Yeah. Me too. Thank you for inviting me. It's actually because like Aaron had been telling me you have to listen to Empowered LEP podcast.
Yeah. Well, good. Well, you should listen to.
That's when I think you messaged me and I was like, what an honor. Thank you.
Oh yeah.
I've been hearing about you.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm like, you know what? I'm gonna invite this girl. She looks like she's got some stuff to say.
I do have so much to say.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
I created a whole account just so I could say stuff.
Well, it's such an inspiring field, and I'm having such a great time just getting to talk to people who are, even still working in schools, but just like doing something also a little bit different, because I think we just have like these different gifts. And I think it's inspiring for people to hear other people's stories because it helps us. It's almost like, I think also school psychologists like to have like 5 different jobs at a time. And yeah. And that's another theme that's running through our my podcast that I'm doing, is I'm realizing like nobody just does one thing. And so this is like inspirational, gives people like food for thought, like, oh, I could do a little something over here, over there. And so, yeah, thanks for all this good work you're doing, inspiring us and feeding everybody information and having a good time while you're doing it, it looks like.
Yes, I really do enjoy it. It's like a lot, like I said, it's a lot of hours and definitely a second job, but I wouldn't be doing it if it wasn't like fulfilling to me. Like it definitely, it excites me and makes me feel good. It feels like I'm giving back to our community, and also learning so much from other people and getting to geek out with other people that care about what I care about.
Yeah. Well, with that, I will say thank you very much, Briana, for being on the Empower LEP podcast. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Have a good day.
You too. Thank you for listening to the Empower LEP podcast. Episodes can be found at empowerlep.com. If you liked what you heard, please leave a 5-star rating and review on your favorite podcast player. If you'd like to be a guest on the show, or if you have any questions for me, don't hesitate to connect. I would love to learn more. I can be found at jana@empowerlep.com.